Gary Marshall has kept America laughing, cracking us up for half a century, creating some of the funniest and most memorable movies and sitcoms ever produced.
It's 1977. America is glued to TV screens, popcorn in hand, watching a man in a leather jacket and swim trunks water ski over a live shark. The audience erupts, ratings soar, and somewhere inside ABC, writers quietly think, we've made a terrible mistake. That bizarre moment didn't just divide fans, it sparked a slow unraveling that eventually ended one of television's most beloved shows. Behind the clean image was a messier story, network interference, a botched finale, financial disputes, and buried controversies. The Rise. Before we get to the drama, and oh honey, there is plenty of drama, we need to talk about just how massive Happy Days actually was, because you cannot appreciate the fall without first understanding the height of the throne. Happy Days debuted on ABC on January 15, 1974. Created by Gary Marshall, the show was a love letter to 1950s Midwestern America, poodle skirts, jukeboxes, malt shops, and the kind of innocent, squeaky-clean teenage life that baby boomers were desperate to relive after the chaos of Vietnam and Watergate. It starred a fresh-faced Ron Howard as Richie Cunningham, the all-American boy next door, alongside Tom Bosley and Marion Ross as his parents, and a scrappy, leather-jacketed supporting character named Arthur Fonzarelli, played by a then-unknown Henry Winkler. Here's the thing, though, the show very nearly didn't make it. After a decent debut that ranked 16th in the Nielsen ratings its first season, Happy Days nearly drove itself off a cliff in Season 2, hemorrhaging viewers and crashing to a humiliating 49th place. The network was not pleased. So Gary Marshall made a bold, controversial call. He overhauled the entire format, switching from a single-camera setup with a laugh track to a full multi-camera production filmed in front of a live studio audience. And crucially, he made one other massive change. He shoved the mild-mannered Richie Cunningham to the side and put that leather-jacketed sidekick, the Fonz, front and center. Now, here's where the behind-the-scenes gossip gets delicious. Because Ron Howard, the actual star of the show, was reportedly furious. This wasn't just a creative disagreement. It was the opening shot of a years-long battle between the show's creators and an ABC network that had already decided it knew better than everyone in that writer's room. In a 50th anniversary retrospective with the New York Times in 2024, Howard admitted the shift was a reckoning for him. And it wasn't just the creative pivot that stung. ABC wanted to rename the entire show. They literally wanted to call it Fonzie's Happy Days. Howard told them flat out he would rather go back to USC and film school. "I told them I would leave," he said. He was not bluffing. Remarkably, Henry Winkler himself, the very person who would have benefited from the name change, also refused it. Winkler thought it would be disrespectful to the rest of the ensemble cast. So the title stayed. Howard stayed. And Happy Days was reborn. But make no mistake, this moment planted the first seed of the dysfunction that would eventually hollow the show out. Because the network had tasted what it wanted, the Fonzie show, and it was never going to fully let that hunger go. By the 1976 to 77 television season, the show had climbed all the way to the top, #1 in the Nielsen ratings, ending the 5-year reign of All in the Family. It spawned blockbuster spin-offs, Laverne and Shirley, and eventually Mork and Mindy, which launched Robin Williams into superstardom after he appeared as an alien in a 1978 episode. The Fonz's leather jacket was so iconic, it ended up in the Smithsonian Institution's permanent collection at the National Museum of American History. Happy Days wasn't just a TV show, it was a cultural empire. But here's the question nobody could stop asking. How does a #1 show, a genuine, undeniable pop culture phenomenon, end up canceled, humiliated, ranked at number 63, and quietly swept off the air? And why does the cast's cheerful public story so badly contradict what was actually happening behind the scenes? The shark and the network that wouldn't let go. Let's talk about the scene, the one that gave pop culture a phrase it still won't let go of. September 20th, 1977. Season 5 premieres with a 3-part episode titled Hollywood. The gang heads to California, and in the grand finale, Fonzie leather jacket swapped for swim trunks water skis over a caged tiger shark to win a dare. It pulled in over 30 million viewers. On paper, a hit. But something felt off. The wild part? It happened because of Henry Winkler's dad. Winkler had been a water ski instructor as a teen, and after years of his father insisting he tell creator Gary Marshall, he finally did. Marshall ran with it. Winkler performed most of the stunt himself, with pro skier Ricky McCormick handling the actual jump. And just like that, TV history was made, for better or worse. Behind the scenes, reactions were mixed. Ron Howard later called the episode a jumbled mess creatively, even if the stunt itself was fun. Don Most, on the other hand, saw the writing on the wall. He reportedly pulled Howard aside and questioned what the show was turning into. At the time, it sounded dramatic. In hindsight, it sounded accurate. Years later, radio host John Hine coined the phrase "jumping the shark," using that exact moment to describe when a show trades substance for spectacle. The label stuck, and so did the association with Happy Days. But the shark wasn't the real problem, it was a symptom. Behind the scenes, ABC had been pushing harder and harder to center everything around Fonzie, gradually sidelining the ensemble and the grounded, family-driven tone that made the show work in the first place. Creative tension between the network, Gary Marshall, and key cast members had been building for years. This was just the moment it became impossible to ignore. To be fair, Winkler and Howard have both pushed back on the narrative. The show didn't collapse overnight, it stayed highly rated for a while. But critics weren't pointing to a sudden fall. They were noticing a slow shift. A once edgy character becoming almost superhuman. A relatable show drifting into the absurd. And a network tightening its grip. Because when that happens, the pattern is always the same. The foundation cracks, the tone slips, and eventually the people who made it work start walking away. The Exodus. Stars jumping ship. The first and most devastating blow hit in 1980 when Ron Howard walked away after season 7. This wasn't a casual exit. He'd grown frustrated with ABC, which, in his words, refused to see him as anything beyond Richie Cunningham and wouldn't take his ambitions in production seriously. Howard had already directed Grand Theft Auto in 1977. And when NBC's Fred Silverman offered him real creative opportunity, he left. ABC's reaction? One executive compared it to an eagle swooping down and snatching a baby from a cradle. Dramatic, yes, but telling. The show scrambled, writing Richie out by sending him to the Army and marrying him off via phone. Ted McGinley was brought in as a replacement, but the chemistry never clicked. Then Don Most and Anson Williams also exited, gutting the core dynamic. What remained was essentially the Fonzie show, but without Richie as contrast, the magic faded. Fonzie alone couldn't carry what had once been an ensemble. Then, in 1982, came Joni Love's Chachi, which pulled more familiar faces away, but it flopped within a year. At the same time, NBC's The A-Team dominated the same time slot, crushing Happy Days in the ratings and pushing it into a steep decline. By 1984, the show was done, but behind the scenes, things were about to get even messier. The darker side. Most official retrospectives on Happy Days will tell you, and they're largely right, that the set itself was unusually warm and harmonious compared to other vintage sitcoms. The cast was close. Gary Marshall ran a collaborative ship. By the standards of the era, it was, by most accounts, genuinely a good place to work. But the set was happy, and the business around the show was clean, are two very different statements. And it's the second one where things get considerably darker. For starters, there was the money. While Happy Days was minting millionaires at the network and generating enormous syndication revenue that would continue for decades, a number of the show's cast members were reportedly living far more modestly than the show's success would suggest. The licensing and merchandising machine, Fonzie lunchboxes, Happy Days board games, t-shirts, records, was generating enormous revenue. And the people who had actually made that merchandise valuable? Many of them were seeing very little of it. This resentment wasn't just grumbling, it eventually erupted into a courtroom. In 2011, nearly 3 decades after the show ended, cast members Erin Moran, Don Most, Marion Ross, and Anson Williams, along with the estate of the late Tom Bosley, filed a $10 million breach of contract lawsuit against CBS, which owned the show's syndication rights. The claim: they had been systematically cheated out of merchandise revenue they were contractually owed. The curtain pulled all the way back, and what was behind it wasn't exactly Happy Days. Then there are the allegations that go darker still. More recent investigative deep dives into the show's history have surfaced claims of sexual harassment tied to the early years of the production. Allegations that were, by multiple accounts, known at the time and not acted on. A BC, according to these accounts, was among those who opted to downplay or bury these stories rather than address them, protecting the show's wholesome image at the expense of the people reportedly harmed. These allegations remained largely suppressed for decades, only resurfacing in the kind of investigative retrospectives that the internet has made possible. Now, to be fair, Happy Days was not uniquely corrupt. The entire entertainment industry of that era was riddled with the same dynamics. Studios prioritizing image over accountability, talent contracts that favored the suits, and a culture of silence around misconduct that went almost entirely unchallenged. What makes Happy Days notable isn't that it was uniquely bad. It's that it was so specifically sold as the opposite, as wholesome, as family-friendly, as a golden age of innocence, that the gap between the image and the reality feels particularly stark. The real drama of Happy Days, in other words, was never the shark. It was the distance between what the show told America it was and what was actually going on behind those cheerful set walls. And all of that background makes what happened at the very end of the show feel even more significant. Because when it came time to say goodbye, ABC managed to botch it in a way that left the cast blindsided, the audience confused, and the show denied the proper farewell it deserved. A finale nobody planned properly. The Happy Days series finale, Passages, aired on May 8, 1984 as a 1-hour special. It featured Ron Howard returning as Richie Cunningham in a guest appearance, giving fans long-awaited closure after his sudden exit 4 years earlier. The episode was designed to wrap up lingering storylines and provide a sense of resolution, marking the end of the series and reconnecting viewers with one of its most iconic original characters before the show concluded. The episode was written as a clean, respectful goodbye. Joni and Chachi finally got married. Richie and Lori Beth came home with their son, Richie Jr. The Cunningham house was full again. And then, as the episode neared its conclusion, Tom Bosley, as beloved patriarch Howard Cunningham, delivered a wedding toast, turned, and looked directly into the camera. He broke the fourth wall. He spoke to the audience at home. "Thank you all for being part of our family," he said. And then, to Happy Days. It was the most honest, human, emotionally resonant moment the show had produced in years. Bosley later recalled it was a genuine acknowledgement of the audience that had kept these characters alive for over a decade. A brief montage followed, set to a sound-alike performing Elvis Presley's Memories, and just like that, it was over. Except behind the scenes, it was not that simple. What you need to know is that ABC reportedly altered and cut key elements of that farewell sequence at the last minute. Changes the cast and crew were not fully prepared for, and that left many of them feeling blindsided. The version that aired was not what they had intended to deliver. The emotional architecture of that final toast was partially dismantled before it reached the audience, and the people who had actually made the show felt the show had been denied a proper closing chapter. Not by the passage of time or declining ratings, but by the very network that was supposed to be honoring it. It was, in miniature, the entire story of Happy Days' decline. Creative people trying to do something genuine, and a network quietly deciding it knew better. Many YouTube explainers often point to the fourth wall toast as the exact moment that ultimately pushed Happy Days off the air. They argue that the network's interference in that scene, along with its broader mishandling of the series finale, served as the most visible and definitive sign of a deeper breakdown. What was once a BC's crown jewel had become a show strained by creative tension, poor decisions, and growing disconnect, with that altered moment symbolizing everything that had gradually gone wrong behind the scenes. And then, because this story cannot end without one final absurdity, Passages wasn't even technically the last episode to air. During the 1983 to 84 season, 5 episodes had been bumped from their scheduled time slots because of the 1984 Winter Olympics in Sarajevo. Rather than delay the finale, ABC aired Passages as planned, and then broadcast those 5 preempted episodes in the summer of 1984 as bonus episodes. On September 24, 1984, nearly 4.5 months after the official, emotional, fourth wall-breaking series finale, a quiet, entirely unremarkable episode titled Fonzie's Spots became the very last Happy Days episode to ever air on American television. No fanfare, no ceremony, no Tom Bosley looking into the camera. Just Fonzie, Al's Diner, and the end of an era, slipping off the air with almost nobody noticing. It was not the send-off that an era-defining show deserved, but given everything, the network meddling, the cast lawsuit, the buried allegations, the deliberate dismantling of the finale, maybe it was exactly the send-off that ABC's handling of the show deserved. What Happy Days left behind. So what does it all add up to? The shark jump, the exits, the network meddling, the messy ending, the lawsuit, the stories that never quite made it into the spotlight. The legacy of Happy Days is complicated. And honestly, that's what makes it so interesting. On one side, it's a cultural giant, 11 seasons, 255 episodes, multiple hit spin-offs. It introduced audiences to Robin Williams, turned Henry Winkler into a global star, and helped launch Ron Howard toward an Oscar-winning directing career with films like Apollo 13, A Beautiful Mind, and Frost/Nixon. Even Anson Williams quietly built a solid career behind the camera. The show didn't just succeed, it stuck, finding new life in syndication around the world. But then there's the other side. This is the show that gave us Jumping the Shark, and became the textbook example of it. A slow unraveling where spectacle started replacing substance, and one breakout character began overshadowing the entire story. It's what happens when a network starts steering harder than the people who built the thing in the first place. Official retrospectives still love to paint the set as harmonious, and that may be true. But the real tension wasn't always on camera. It lived behind the scenes. In the creative interference, the mishandled ending, the long-delayed legal battles, and the quieter stories that never fully surfaced. That's the real legacy. Not just a beloved sitcom, but a case study in how success can quietly start working against itself. Happy Days debuted as a gentle, nostalgic dream. A warm, safe, familiar world that Americans desperately wanted to escape into. And for a beautiful, electric stretch of years in the mid to late 1970s, it absolutely delivered on that promise. It was the #1 show in the country. It was a cultural institution. And then, slowly, one shark, one departure, one ratings dip at a time, it became something else entirely. A show chasing its own ghost. And a network chasing a version of the show that had never really existed. The scene that supposedly started it all, Fonzie in swim trunks launching himself over a tiger shark, was watched by 30 million people and cheered loudly. But some in that crowd were already sensing in their gut that the show they'd fallen in love with had just waved goodbye. In the end, the final goodbye never truly got a proper send-off. The network removed key parts of the farewell it had been given, weakening its impact. Then, without much attention, the show quietly exited on a September Tuesday in 1984, airing an episode many viewers didn't even realize was the last. There was no grand celebration or clear ending, just an understated departure that came and went almost unnoticed, marking the close of an era in television history. That, perhaps, is the most Happy Days ending imaginable, a show that was all about nostalgia, ultimately becoming the thing everyone feels nostalgic about, while the people who actually built it were still fighting, years later, just to get what they were owed. If you made it this far, smash that like button, drop a comment telling me your favorite Happy Days memory, and subscribe if you haven't already. Because there are plenty more stories just like this one, shows that rose to the top and fell in ways nobody saw coming. See you in the next one.